Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for our 8th and final panel, Fact and Fiction, Active Campaigning in the Gray Zone. Colonel Trevor Hough, our moderator, is a longtime member of the Special Operations community whose many achievements includes command of Joint Special Operations Command, Joint Intelligence Brigade. Colonel Hough will now lead a discussion that defines gray zone activities and describes SOF's role in actively campaigning within them. Colonel Hough, the floor is yours.
Charlie, thank you very much. Appreciate it. It's an honor to be here today. Welcome to panel 8, the best panel saved for last, and I hope we get some good questions from virtual audience participation. As Charlie said, fact and fiction, active campaigning in the gray zone. And the question before us today really is, what are gray zone operations and what is SOF's role in active campaigning in those operations? To help us tease out some thoughts and answers, I'm joined by the following panelists, all of whom have exceptionally relevant experience and knowledge in gray zone operations, including in Eastern Europe and in the Pacific, both from a research perspective and from a very hands-on perspective. Mr. Doug Jordan is the lead for the newly developed Information Advantage and Strategic Influence Learning Pathway for the Joint Special Operations University. He also serves as the course director for the Special Operations Forces Security Cooperation course in the Information Related Capabilities Seminar. Mr. Jordan is a retired Army Psychological Operations officer who has experience working with the Department of State, NATO, and each of the information-related capabilities. And he also recently completed an assignment as the Ministry of Defense Advisor for Strategic Communication for Ukraine. So we welcome and look forward to his very relevant and recent experiences. Also on the panel today, Lieutenant Colonel retired Brian Babcock-Lumish is the director of the Petraeus Center for Emerging Leaders at the Institute for the Study of War. He is also an adjunct associate professor in the Center for Security Studies at Georgetown University, a non-resident fellow at the Modern War Institute at West Point, and a security fellow of the Truman National Security Project. He served as a U.S. Army military intelligence officer, retiring after 24 years in uniform, and Dr. Babcock-Lumish received his commission from West Point, later graduating from Oxford and King's College London, his PhD as a Harry S. Truman Scholar. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Royal United Services Institute, the International Institute for Strategic Studies, and Chatham House. And last, we have Major Kate Nelson. She's the National Media Manager for the Army Enterprise Marketing Office, which includes things such as linear video. I don't know what that is. I'm gonna have to ask after this. Streaming video, programmatic online video, sports, entertainment, esports, digital, direct, streaming audio, paid social, and print media. As a military intelligence officer, she most recently served as the U.S. Army Pacific G2 Battle Captain, critical role where she was responsible for tracking the integration and execution of intelligence operations across the Pacific theater, which is so key to gray zone operations for our nation. She began her career as an enlisted radio operator with 5th Special Forces Group, deploying multiple times with JSOU throughout Iraq. Major Nelson will complete her doctorate in business administration from Temple University this summer, focusing on digital fan engagement. So we welcome the panelists, and we might be joined later by Major General Josh Rudd if his schedule permits. So before turning over to the panelists, I want to call out the Special Operations Forces monograph. The SOF monograph published by JSOU calls out several tasks for SOF. These include global special warfare, agents of influence, unconventional warfare for integrated deterrence, crisis response and countering weapons of mass destruction, and serving as a strategic screening force. And in the last paragraph of the monograph, it really calls out the criticality of joint interagency, intergovernmental, multinational, and commercial entities. And that, to me, is key and should be woven throughout SOCOM's gray zone campaigning as a key cornerstone and pillar of everything that we do. Likewise, and at a broader level, the National Defense Strategy 2022 was recently sent across the river to Congress. And it notes 3 means by which the department will advance our goals. And SOCOM will have to nest and no doubt has already started looking at how to do this best. 1 is integrated deterrence, 2 is campaigning, and 3 is building enduring advantages. And it should be no surprise to anyone that China and Russia figured prominently throughout the excerpt from the NDS that has been made public. So with that as background, the first thing I want to do, it's kind of like calisthenics or stretching before going out and doing really hard physical training. I want to send a nice softball question to the panel members and ask them, first up, what are gray zone operations and what is from their perspective, what is SOF's role in active campaigning in them? And we'll start with Mr. Jordan, please.
Well, thanks for having me on the panel. I really appreciate it. I'm actually in the process right now of conducting a pilot course for the integrated program of study, and we're actually talking about these types of issues. The question that you asked is, what's our role? What's SOCOM's role? SOCOM has a history not only in the fourth age of SOF, but throughout SOF's history, through all the ages of SOF, of working in kind of ambiguous space. And the two areas that I focus on here at the university is one is information, and there's a new publication coming out hopefully any day, joint publication 3-04, which is going to be information in joint operations. And SOCOM, we're already in that space. We're proponents for civil affairs and for psychological operations. So we have people out doing this in what some would say the gray zone, but already operating in this space. Doing influence. The term integrated deterrence is an influence word, right? Deterrence is an influence term. One of the things I've discussed with colleagues is who is the best deterrence expert that we know? And in my mind, it might be Henry Kissinger. I'm not sure if we have a luminary in this field, and that may be something we can discuss. The other area, and you talked about my experience that kind of blended these two areas. I was in Ukraine as an information advisor, strategic communication advisor, but I was doing security cooperation. Again, building partner capacity in the influence space. And I think that's another area. It has risk. And as in SOCOM, that's part of why we do what we do is we are low profile, small footprint, but potentially high risk. But I think that building partner capacity and these types of roles in security cooperation, we're very good at it. The roles are going to increase. People are going to be out there alone and unafraid, helping partners develop the same types of capabilities and capacities that we have and our allies have. And often it might involve partnering with another country, Lithuania, Poland, the Philippines, Australia, where we're going to work together. And I think that we're experienced in that. There's a new element within the Army, the Security Force Assistance Command. There are people that are going to do this building partner capacity. And I think there's opportunities for us to bring them with us into the gray zone and relieve us of some of the responsibilities and quite honestly, in some cases, a little bit of the burden. We can share the effort with not only our partners, but also with this new unit. But I look forward to the conversation.
No, thank you for that. And you make a good point on deterrence. I think certainly the Cold War was replete with deterrence taking place every day, throughout that period. Oftentimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But I think over the past 20-ish years, deterrence relies on somewhat of a rational actor on the other end, that is, who's being deterred. And we didn't necessarily have that. Our ability to deter the various terrorist groups over the past 20 years really, it wasn't the thing. We tried it, we talked about it some, but now deterrence, when we talk great power competition, is absolutely critical. And I would argue that what we're seeing in Eastern Europe is a breakdown of deterrence in many respects and our ability to have that credible deterrence. So I appreciate you highlighting that, Doug. Brian, question over to you. Same question. Give me your thoughts, if you would, give the panel and our audience thoughts on what is your view of what gray zone operations are.
Sure. So as an intel officer, my bias is to think about things from the perspective of red, from a potential adversary. And I'm going to focus on Russia for this conversation. And I recognize that there actually are subtle differences between the debate about what is gray zone versus what is hybrid warfare. So I'm going to focus on the Russian conception of hybrid warfare. And they view that as a strategic level effort to shape the governance and geostrategic orientation of a target state in which all actions up to and including the use of conventional military forces in regional conflicts are subordinate to an information campaign. And I think that last piece is really important because the way the Russians operate is that they treat information as a sixth domain. You've got land, sea, air, space, cyber, and information is actually not synonymous with cyber to the Russians. And of course, the West has really started paying attention to Ukraine from February 24th onward. You know, people were watching the run-up to the invasion. But from Russia's perspective, they've been in the gray zone and operating in a hybrid warfare format in Ukraine since 2014, right? In response to, you know, the little green men running around seizing Crimea, right? That was all part of Russian hybrid warfare. And the other piece that I think is really important to understand is that from the Russians' perspective, they believe the United States has been engaged in hybrid warfare against Russia for nearly 20 years. And they think, you know, US CIA case officers and special operators are behind every color revolution in the former Soviet Union. But in particular, of course, there was the Orange Revolution in Ukraine in 2014, and then the Maidan Revolution, Orange Revolution in 2004, and the Maidan Revolution in 2014. So before we can understand what US special operations ought to do, I think it's important to understand how our adversaries view this concept, how they are operating, and how they think we are operating before we can answer the question of what US SOF ought to do about this.
That's a great point, Brian. And I want to return to that in a subsequent question, but I want to give Kate a chance to give us her thoughts here on what her perspective is.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I agree with what the previous two panelists were saying. And from my point of view, as an intel officer, what I look at gray ops is, my role in it is providing and preparing the team, providing information, tracking and gathering, and then integrating it all into something that's actionable or something that can be used for decision making in the future. Now, my role in marketing right now is not gray operations, but it is to build a team and help build a team and share our message to those who will be the ones executing these operations in the future. So for me, it's all about the knowledge of what is happening, and then the why it's happening, and then kind of explaining what to do about that. So.
Thank you for that. And a question heading back over to Mr. Jordan. Based on your experience working with Ukraine, what did SOF do well? What could we have done better within your particular portfolio? And what preliminary lessons can we draw? We're a month into this now, but I think we can probably start drawing some lessons, especially based on what you experienced and saw while you were there.
I would say one of the things that we did exceptionally well is we were present and we developed rapport. So our counterparts, even though we rotate, I was not there in a special operations capacity. I was detailed through the Air Force to Defense Security Cooperation Agency. But I think part of what allowed me to be selected was my background and my experience as a special operations person. Additionally, I think that as I did my work, they realized that I brought with it the experience, knowledge, my network, those types of things. And I think that that's what our special operators do is there's a continuity and a consistency of quality that arrives. And then additionally, especially, I was focused really on the building partner capacity side, and I worked with the special operations liaison officer who was out of European Command, a Navy SEAL captain out of European Command, or SOCEUR. So we're providing quality people that the partner really can take advice from. Additionally, I think that because it's in our mission set and it's in our DNA, we sit with our partner and we truly do partner. We develop our experience and our skill sets and our style. But what I saw was the rapport. The rapport that we have with our counterparts is that the speed of trust. We talk about speed of trust. You can't build trust overnight. And I think that to a mission that I saw in 1 year. And I actually went there on a mission as doing a mobile education training for the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense before I interviewed for the job and got hired. So when I showed up, it was interesting. When I showed up to interview for the job, my counterparts were laughing hysterically because they're like, "What are you doing? You're coming here to interview to work for us?" And I'm like, "Yeah, if you'll have me." And I think from that point on, whether it's a soft lead, whether it's a MIST or someone doing training or helping with equipment or doing exercises, I think that we just, and I think it's not only Ukraine, but across the board, we do well at building rapport and partnerships, and we build that trust, and that's very important. And I think that now that things have occurred, we help to build capacity, capability, and resilience within the military and within special operations for when it happens. We plan worst case, we hope best case, but when it happens, I think that that connective tissue is still there, and we have the ability, whether we're providing, military support or advice or whatever we're doing, it's when things get tough, we're still there, and I think that's very important.
No, that's excellent, Doug. And I think you're highlighting the criticality of being forward, of having that presence and building rapport with our host nation partners and our GMC partners over time and over reps and sets. I want to come back to you for a question, and then we'll go to Kate after this, and then over to Brian. But you hit on really your focus on part of information warfare and messaging and getting the proper message out to the audience. What is, from your view, and Kate, I'll come to you afterwards in your new role as a public affairs officer, how important is that in gray zone operations?
So right now, the students in my course are going through operational design, and the new manual has some new, focus on doing information support to not only the base plan, but also doing a more detailed plan for information. And I think that step 2, which is, the mission analysis and really, audience analysis, is understanding. Often I think we get focused on what we want to say versus what the audience is receptive to hearing, right? And I think that if we don't do the work, if we're not intellectually honest, I think we have bad results. And I think 20 years, everyone has a scar tissue from something that didn't go well. But know your target audience is what we say. The other thing I think is very important, and I appreciate the opportunity to say this, is information is not just for information subject matter experts anymore. Joint Pub 1 information is a joint function. Everyone has to understand the function of information. And I think that this new manual will help with that. The Joint Staff is working on, getting into joint professional military education. And one of the last comment I'll make is, there is value to understanding history and there's value to understanding theory, but the doctrine right now, I think we're seeing it's applied theory. It's based on historical examples, which, lessons learned, lessons not learned are supposed to feed into doctrine. But this is kind of a really shift, and I would encourage everyone, once it comes out, I think we're going to do some other educational events of this type that talk about information a little more. But I just think it's we have to be honest with doing the process and understanding the audience and understanding the effect that the commander wants to achieve. The strategic vision, and that's why we're doing design today, because I think a lot of us in this world, we focus on messages and products. We don't focus on the commander's end state. And if we can visualize that in the information space and support, we can actually achieve that vision.
Yeah, excellent, Doug, and really teed up question back to Kate really well of what is the role of a public affairs officer in your team in doing and supporting the commander in the way that Doug just described?
Oh, well, for us, sir, I mean, he was right, the right audience is something, but we understand that when we put information out, it's public and it's meant to be seen by everyone, whether that's the specific person that we're targeting or adversaries or whoever. So we understand that it's public, and so we have to ensure that it's in line with the greater mission in that case. And we have to show the history of why we fight and what fight we've been in and what we're doing from a public standpoint of how we are building our own team in order to fight or deter any future operations. And so for us, it's finding the right people to get our message across to when it comes to the people who will join, but it's also understanding that that message is going to be used and could potentially be used against us because we're making these videos and these clips and that are out there on public domain, on YouTube, on wherever, and on linear TV, sir, which is just, that just means TV. I mean, that's a fancy word. That means like NBC, ABC. It just means not Hulu, not Netflix. It's just a fancy term, but they can use these videos against us. They can edit it in certain ways and use them for propaganda and everything like that. And so our perspective is not just to show our message, but also to ensure that our message doesn't get torn apart or used against us. And so that's sort of our role in that. So.
No, I appreciate that, Kate. And I think, it's getting the message out there and trying to control the narrative. We can always speak from a position of truth and putting out the message that is showing exactly what our soldiers or our joint force are doing, or our interagency partners, to the degree we can put that out there. Sometimes that can be as compelling as anything in the more clandestine world. And so your PAO team plays a huge part in that. I think both you talked about something, and I'm going to go to Brian next. Both of you talked about the concept of really knowing your target audience before putting out this information. I know Brian was talking some about how the Russians view this. Brian, can you speak to both from your history as an intelligence officer and certainly now at a think tank, the role of and the importance of knowing what the target audience, both the friendly target audience in a country like Ukraine or maybe a country in the Pacific Rim that we're trying to educate and influence, and also knowing how the enemy or the target is viewing the information that we're putting out. Can you speak to that and the role of the think tank in that?
Sure. And this is where a couple of points. The first one is the way in which those in government often have a bias toward classified information being inherently better, more reliable, more accurate, this kind of thing. And now, certainly being on the outside at a think tank that very explicitly does not do anything classified, and we only work in the OSINT space, doing open source intelligence, I have gotten a much greater appreciation for the value of information when properly gathered, collated, assessed, put together, and disseminated. And I mean, the example that I would hold up right now is if you've seen anything about the Ukraine conflict in media coverage lately, you've probably seen the underlying map data from my counterparts here at the Institute for the Study of War. The ArcGIS files that they've built derived solely from OSINT, showing what terrain the Russians control. And there have been some methodological debates about this on Twitter. And we are very much holding to the conventional warfare definition of control of terrain, not the ability to govern in a coin environment type definition, right? Can you dominate that terrain with conventional forces? Can you deny the enemy the ability to operate in that space? But when it comes to, as I talked about, the fight really being in the information domain, one thing that no unit likes to hear is that they are the supporting effort. Everybody likes to be the supported effort. But in hybrid warfare, everything else is subordinated to information. And from the Russian perspective, they're specifically trying to influence adversaries' leaders' perceptions. They are much less interested actually in swaying the American public. They want to influence President Biden, Capitol Hill, right? That kind of thing. And sometimes they'll do it via the populace, but that's actually less of their objective. And so the fight really is about the headspace of leaders from the Russian perspective when it comes to these information fights. Now the Chinese and their gray zone tactics are a little bit different. And you can, the case study of what they've been doing with maritime militias and sort of the land reclamation in the South China Sea that started when I was on my hardship tour in Hawaii, watching the Chinese back in 2014 to 2017. That's a little bit different, but it really is about influencing leadership decisions from the Russian perspective.
Thank you for that, Brian. And question going back to Doug, has the advent of social media being in everyone's hands pretty much globally, and their ability to quickly tweet something out, to call into question Brian's ISW work and the snap of a finger or whatever the case may be, has that changed, or how has that changed? A better question: how has that changed the role of special operations in this information environment, since everyone out there can essentially be their own public affairs officer, either for well-intentioned or for ill will?
So one of the things I would say is that Ukraine, the official sources of Ukraine, whether it's the president's office, the Ministry of Defense, Army Inform, the radio station is on the web. If you want to listen to Ukrainian Army FM, you can get it all. How does it change the role for us? I think that special operations, we're already kind of forward leaning in some of these areas, but I'm not sure that everyone understands everything, and I'm not sure that we need to understand everything. I've met people that have never met a tool or a platform that they didn't like. What I will say though, and this is, obviously it's unclassified, and maybe you're aware of this, maybe you're not aware of this, but Ukraine, when the attack occurred, and I don't know the source of this claim, but I know this to be true, that they took their COVID Twitter network, like notification SMS network, that they were communicating COVID information, and they basically turned it into an alert network to talk to the population about where things were happening. When they did curfew, they put out curfews, and open source, what they looked at is, hey, we're going to do curfews to allow us to sweep up some of these units that are still on the street, and we don't want Ukrainian citizens to get caught up in that. So I think that the way that they have done it is pretty impressive. I think that when things go back to peace or somewhat normal, there's a good opportunity to kind of do some lessons learned. I think right now there's a lot of people guessing about what happened, right? We're scraping Twitter and we're scraping all this data, trying to figure out what they did. And I think that they absolutely know what they did. And because we're such good partners with them, I think they will be willing to share that with NATO and other academics and that type of thing. I think there's a way to incorporate some lessons learned. I did a paper for Iowa and the Pacific a couple of years ago. I think I was actually in Ukraine when I presented the paper. But I looked at kind of the information related capabilities that Russia was testing in Ukraine, and all through open source, you could see the electronic warfare, the OPSEC, all kinds of things that they had done. I think that there's an opportunity for us to, I would say, refresh our TTPs, and we need to be very progressive, continue to be forward leaning in this area.
Doug, you make a good point, and thanks for highlighting that. Whose responsibility is it to capture? There's multiple hands in this. I don't know if there's a one focal point, but whose responsibility would it be to collect up those lessons specific to what you're describing in terms of the information environment, so that we can put them back into either curricular JSOU or training pipeline at Fort Bragg, something like that?
I think that there will be lots of researchers doing papers in this area. There are already people writing journal articles or small wars articles. I think there needs to be some academic rigor. There needs to be some peer review on some of this. But the other thing I would say is we don't want to overwhelm our partners either by sending a bunch of people in there. I think they're going to write about it too and share it with us. I think Poland has lessons learned. I think Lithuania, everybody has lessons learned right now. And we should be doing our part of what we're seeing in the United States, and we can add to this body of work. It's a good opportunity for like a collected volume or something like that, or maybe even a journal. If we're doing a journal, gathering up some articles. The NATO Stratcom Center of Excellence in Riga, I know, is looking at this, and they also publish extensively on this.
Interesting. And then Kate, same question over to you. Within PAO circles, do you think a lot of lessons to be pulled out from the way Ukraine and the way the West has been handling the messaging and the narrative so far?
Yes, absolutely, sir. The great thing about social media is that anyone can use it and that it's real time. That's also the terrible thing about it, because as we know, oftentimes the first reports are not entirely perfect, and then they don't have the full picture in place. But it does sway public opinion, and it sways it sways how people look and think something's going on, which then can impact second and third order effects on our messaging internally. So I think that the social media piece to this is very, very interesting, and it's going to continue that way. I know previously I was assigned to an unmanned aircraft unit where I was a targeting and reconnaissance officer, and I remember we had a strike and we had a mission that we were doing, and obviously it was fully secretive and everything like that. We're watching it on that screen, but then on social media we got even better pictures of the reaction. We got real time quicker info, and it's not vetted, so you do have to take it with a grain of salt. And it was just wild to see in real time how social media can drive what you're doing and what you react to it.
Yeah, great point, Kate. I certainly, and I think all of us have watched. My assessment would be that frequently, and this is through probably no one person's fault, it's more the bureaucracy, we're slow to get our message out. And as a result, we lose control. And by the time it's gone through a bunch of wickets to get pushed out, I think in an earlier panel, they talked about the release for maybe a munition residing at maybe the 04, 05 level, but a release for a tweet or a public affairs announcement being held up at the general and flag officer level. And certainly that is, while I acknowledge that tweets go around the world and everything else, like we have to move faster, we have to be better about it. If you think that is painful, certainly my own experience sitting up at the National Security Council trying to unify messaging across the departments and agencies of the government on particular topics showed how slow and how bureaucratically painful it can be, and to try to get in front of it, and you end up being very reactive in this space. And so that's unfortunate. We do have some questions coming in. Before we hit a question, I wanted to head over to Brian and talk about, you highlighted the role of open source intelligence. Do you have visibility either from your time as an intelligence officer or now sitting at the Institute for the Study of War on how our joint interagency teammates, maybe the DoD is viewing open source intelligence, how we're viewing the understanding of it, the training, the utilization of it, and maybe make recommendations for ways forward that we can improve that.
Sure. One of the things that I saw even back in 2014, 2015, that the community was struggling with in some ways was, is OSINT a collection discipline, right? Do you have people out scraping the internet, and are they like a humanter? They're just doing it online. Or is it a tool of all source analysis? And is it that it's another stream coming in, or are the all source analysts just adding that as another thing in their building of the holistic picture of the threat environment? The way we approach it at the Institute for the Study of War is that we very much treat our analysts as collector analysts, that we teach them tradecraft about how not to get compromised while you're gathering, and what kinds of tools you use to anonymize your search history and all that sort of stuff, to make sure that you're not getting flagged by the adversaries you're trying to watch. And that the people doing the collecting are also the ones doing the analysis, that we train our folks to do both. And that still seems to be a philosophical struggle happening inside government. There's, it used to be that information was viewed more as, a tool of propaganda that we point, outside the United States, but we can't use domestically. And then, of course, for the U.S. Information Agency way back in the day. And then we continue to struggle with how we treat OSINT and who is the proponent for OSINT when you're talking about across the IC or inside the Army, the different services, things like that. There's always been the typical bureaucratic fights over this kind of thing. And I mean, my perspective is that you really can't do it in just one place. It has to be holistic and feed in at all echelons at scale, because the deluge of information is going to require people working on it at all echelons. You can't have it centrally managed. You can't just have it distributed. You've got to attack it from all different angles. And again, the part that nobody likes is, should information be the dominant line of effort, in fact? And that doesn't fit with Western doctrine of how we think of either conventional or unconventional warfare, right? That's not what we lead with. And this is something where I think the Russians are probably onto something when it comes to subordinating other lines of effort to the information domain.
Thank you for that, Brian. That's excellent points. And as you were talking, I got to thinking that, our ability to use publicly available information in future gray zone operations is absolutely going to be critical. Depending on where they are in the world, we may not have, in one of the early panels, a Polish colleague was speaking to, being locked out of the Five Eyes Cool Guy Club, when that's not something that is helpful to some of our NATO partners, specifically on the eastern edge of NATO. And so how do you take what's out there available in the public domain and use that to make sense of the information space that is happening out there to better inform Kate's public affairs type of operations, or just to understand, hey, this is what's different in the information environment, and this is what the Russians are signaling, or the Chinese, or whomever are signaling in this space, is going to be super important. But in order to do that, you have to step back. And I think, for my money, ISW does a great job of this, of training your personnel so that your whole team can understand that space and make sense of it, and put that back into the greater discussion about a particular country or a particular region. And so we in the US government, while think tanks are excellent partners, we need to have some of that capability on our own. And there are nascent pockets of it, certainly within Special Operations Command, certainly within some of the intelligence community partners, but we're not there yet. And it's a problem of a couple of different things. It's a problem of not trusting it. I think to your point, sometimes not knowing the veracity of it. And then there's also the volume and velocity that the data can come in. So you get into some other issues as well. So I appreciate you hitting on that. One question that came in, and this is going to go to Mr. Jordan. In an earlier panel, it was discussed a skill identifier for military personnel who have soft support expertise was discussed. I know the Army has figured out how to do this right at the tail end of my career, which was fitting, I guess. I don't know if the other services have, maybe the Air Force. But the question is, you indicate that your prior life skill set allowed you to be chosen for your role in Ukraine. As part of your current work efforts, are you capturing the value of SOF for life and getting those who wish to continue to serve in positions that will enable the nation, such as what you did, and will tracking enhance the gray zone effort? So I think boiling that down to a finer point, like if we are able to track our military personnel and our civilian personnel and our teammates who have SOF experience, maybe even regional experience, can we rapidly point them towards something when we need to ramp up quickly in the gray zone? Over to you, Doug.
So I think this is a really good question because do you have to be SOF for life as a person, or is it better to maybe have kind of a catch and release program where people come to SOCOM and do some things, they get some experience, and then they go back out? I was very fortunate that Dr. Marr, the president of JSOU at the time, and Hal McNair and Christopher Jacobs, when this opportunity presented itself, I was given the opportunity to apply. So, and I think that's one of the things is I think that the old days of, once you go to SOF, you're tainted, you can't come back. I think that's changed because a lot of people in the last 20 years have worked with SOCOM. They've been on just SODIFs or they've worked with us. I think an indication of that is the SFA brigades. So the soft truth of, most operations require non-SOF support. I think what we benefit from is that people that work with SOCOM or Special Operations Forces and they like it and they're good at it, have the opportunity to come and work with us. And then they get a chance to leave and go back to wherever they were. And then they get a chance to come back. I think that, I have colleagues who are communication officers. I started out as a communication officer. They came to SOCOM, SOF units, and they stayed in SOF and they were very good at it. I think at one time it was a negative, but in some services, I think going to SOCOM might be looked at as a negative. I think it's how we market it. There's some people that come, they're good for a job or a task, but catch and release, I think also is viable. I do think that when I spent some time, I've had a very strange career because I worked as a combat developer and we had the most 25 mics and I was also the S3 of the 3rd PSYOP battalion, the media battalion. We had the most 25 mics in one unit in the Army. And we put Sierra identifiers. So you could come to the 3rd PSYOP battalion being non-parachute qualified, and I could send you to parachute school, and you could get a Sierra identifier. Same with public affairs, a 46 Romeo, 46 Quebec. But some people didn't want to be in SOCOM all the time, and I think we have to be okay with that too. This is a personal management thing, right? I think also we're going to do a JTF. How do we do our request for forces? I think it's good to have a system to look through people that are used to dealing with risk or ambiguity or the lifestyle. Go do a mission for 6 months and then go back to where you came from. And we treat you well while you're here, right? We need you and we treat you well while you're here.
Appreciate that. Do you know of any efforts within SOCOM, not necessarily to put on the big tractor beam and keep everybody within the SOF enterprise, but to track those personnel, or they're relying completely on the services to track them and be able to give SOF qualified personnel back?
I think in some instances, what's happens, another good example is our reservists. We have great reservists here at JSOU. And every once in a while, someone will apply to come to SOCOM and they'll look through their resume. They'll look through their ORB, the records and say, hey, this person probably has good experience. And that's, I think, communicating requirement. I'm not sure, I'm not a J1 expert, but what's interesting is every one of our services or every one of our partners is dealing with the same thing. How do we track our service members who've worked in special operations? Because they have public affairs, they have logisticians. And so the struggle is real, quite honestly. And I think we could do better. And that's something, but I think that when a crisis occurs, the ability to pulse the network or to do a scrub of the network, what we do right now is we do BroCon. We reach out and say, who do you know? And then the big Chinook lands outside and you get in and it takes you back to SOCOM for a while. We have a tendency to get repeat offenders, and that's okay. But pickup teams is not always the best way to do it for long term and for high level success like we're looking for.
No, Doug, I tend to agree that it's good to have some people who have SOF experience, and that might help operating in the gray zone due to a variety of different things. But my experience throughout my career was that we benefited more from people, servicemen and women, civilians who rotate out, go do an assignment or two in some other place, wherever that may be, and then come back as opportunities present themselves. So I appreciate you highlighting that. Question to go over to Brian. Earlier it was mentioned about the role of leaders in gray zone operations, specifically foreign leaders. Do you think, and I'll open this up to the rest of the panel after Brian takes a swing at it, that it matters whether or not a leader like Putin or Xi is in charge during the next so-called hybrid war, and what is the importance of a role of a foreign leader in a hybrid war?
Yeah, this is one of those questions where I think absolutely personalities matter, right? When you look at trying to understand Putin's decision-making calculus and what influences him, you have to understand his experience as a KGB officer in St. Petersburg and East Germany, right? And that he saw the Soviet Union implode, and it was to him the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century, right? And he rates that as worse than the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union, right? That the collapse in '91 was worse. That is clearly influencing his policy toward Ukraine, his policy toward the Baltic states, right? All of that depends on Putin being Putin. If Yeltsin had not appointed him in 1999 and had put someone else in power, we could be in a very different place. I'm not someone who says that everything of international relations is based on structural variables and it wouldn't matter who was in charge, right? The distribution of power would make Russia be insecure and therefore they would have aggressive policies, right? I don't subscribe to that school of thought. I think the role of individuals is absolutely still essential. And so understanding the nature of an adversary, what their risk tolerance is, how they make decisions. One thing that's clearly good is that Putin is afraid enough of his own place in power that he doesn't put competent people in charge of things. And that has translated to operational failure in Ukraine. That is something that has backfired on him because strong people in strong positions leads to coups. And so he's coup-proofing himself, but it means it hurts him operationally. And I think that is going to continue to be central to understanding enemy adversaries, that you have to get down to the nature of the individual leaders in power, for sure.
Absolutely. I would agree. The great men and women who are leading whatever the country is, but also some levels below that, which is where special operations forces can become super important in terms of our understanding of, it's important we understand Putin's calculus, but now I'm sure the Ukrainians are benefiting from their proximity to Russia in terms of understanding. Clearly, they understand where the general officers are for the Russian army and what their roles are to probably negative effect on the Russian side if what's out in the media is all true. and down even at the battalion, brigade, combat team level. It's super important to understand those leaders and what they're doing as a hybrid war or gray zone becomes sometimes broken off from the rest of the larger force picture, and it becomes very much a small unit on small unit kind of thing. It's important to know what's on the other side, or who's on the other side, and what those leaders are. I wanted to head back to Doug, if I could. And earlier we talked about JSOU education for the fourth generation. And could you hit on the new pathways education that JSOU has stood up, and give us a little bit of insight, and the audience a little bit of insight on that?
Yes, so I'm involved in one of the integrated programs of study. They feed into larger pathways, but what we've been doing here at JSOU, we realize there's really kind of 5 fundamental challenges or areas that are uniquely SOCOM related that needed to have some additional curricula created. And one is soft leadership and ethics. With some of the challenges we've had within SOCOM, the internal review and things like that, SOCOM is faced with unique challenges, and what we say is you're out there alone and unafraid. You don't have a lawyer or a chaplain. And when you're faced with these challenges, there's some literature, there's great centers of learning out there, and we're in the process of partnering with them and creating a series of courses and lessons that are modular that you can take to learn about that. Each of the programs of study is modular. It's intended to be something that you cannot get somewhere else. If you can get it somewhere else, we would recommend why reinvent the wheel? We're going to fill some academic gaps. The second is SOF, strategic intelligence and emerging technology. So looking at the unique requirements of intelligence, and this is again kind of right in your wheelhouse. What is happening with looking at how SOCOM requires intelligence to be done, and how we contribute into intelligence, and additionally looking at technology, artificial intelligence, big data, in the information space, use of social media, things of that type. The third pathway is, I'm switching gears in my brain, is we have my pathway, or the pathway that I'm involved with, is SOF, or special operations, or I'm sorry, strategic influence and information advantage, strategic influence and information advantage. And the emphasis on what is SOF's role in strategic influence, and this new term coming out in the manual that I talked about, JP 3-04, information and joint operations. How, we need to relook at how we're doing things. We're out there doing activities, doing JSETs, doing exercises. How is that contributing to the information space? There's another program of study that is involving, I would say, complex environments or compound security threats. What's SOCOM's role in the Arctic, the tyranny of distance of Asia? We should not be going back to the past in the fourth age of SOF. We should be looking at how do we take these newly developed capabilities and experience, and what's the new requirement for them? So moving forward, the fifth one, I'm gonna fail my exam. The fifth one escapes me right now. It'll come to me in a second, I'm sure. What is unique about them is modular. It's a series of curricula, and we're partnered with other leading universities. And the goal is people can take what they need out of this, and once they've achieved a certain level along their program of study, they can partner or take that learning out to a civilian institution and potentially turn it into a graduate degree or a certificate, or they just use it as a professional development opportunity. But my colleague, Dr. David Oakley, is doing the intelligence program of study. He's already done his first pilot. I'm doing my first pilot this week. We're in the process of developing some marketing materials. We're trying to get the program right first. But the goal is we would do pilots for the remainder of the summer into the rest of the fiscal year. And then starting in October, become programs of record. and market this out to the force. The other thing I think is very important, and I know I'm kind of being windy here, but I think it's important that I have people in my course that are not from SOCOM. I have people from CENTCOM. I have people from the theater IO groups in the Army National Guard, right? These theater IO staffs. I have a person from Web Ops, SOCOM Web Ops. That is SOCOM, but I think that we have to put people in the course that need to be in the course to allow us to have the proper learning environment. So the students can get what they need, and then SOCOM can achieve the capabilities that we require moving forward. This is a very exciting time at JSOU.
It is, and because you weren't able to answer that last one line of effort for JSOU, I want to hit you with a follow-up.
I was hoping someone would write it in the chat, but they didn't. No one helped me out.
They left you hanging. Since the goal is to educate the SOF force for the fourth generation or fourth age, if you will, how and I know I'll ask you just to speak about your particular one. How do you envision receiving feedback from the operational units who are ostensibly going to take that information and better themselves and be better prepared to operate in the fourth age of SOF? How do you think that feedback loop's going to work if you've had a chance to think through that?
So that's what I think is unique about this curricula is Dr. Wilson, the president of the university, has charged us with not only doing, there's three roles that all the faculty have. One is teaching and learning, which is very important at a university. The second is research and analysis. So going out into the units and finding out what the requirements are, doing peer-reviewed scholarly research or partnering with other people to see what they're doing. And then also doing outreach. So actually going out, participating in academic events like this, assisting other people, participating in academic events for other universities, potentially even exchanging faculty, doing some sort of courtesy appointments to where we would be adjunct or something like that, because we have a unique clientele, and that we have unique faculty, and we have something to offer, but we also have things that we require. I'm not going to be a deterrence expert. We probably need to find one, and then we partner with that person, and then we can talk about some things that we do. And I think that's just really a unique opportunity. And I think the people that we're talking to are very interested. There seems to be a little bit of buzz out there about this type of relationship because, this program is funded, the university is funded through MFP 11, SOCOM money. Our primary role is to educate SOF forces, but we also have the role of educating the interagency, people that need to work with us. And potentially, civil society, JIMC, so we should allow, academics, other academics or commercial, civilians in, if we have something to offer them and potentially they have something to potentially offer us. It's not transactional though. We'll work with people that need to work with us.
No, that's excellent and super important to educating our special operations forces so they can best achieve their roles in active campaigning in the gray zone. So I appreciate you highlighting that. Another question here, and this goes out to Kate, talking about deep fakes and social media. How is Army marketing viewing that, and how are we handling it?
That's a great question. For those who might not know what deepfakes are, that's when editing software is used to either make a video of somebody look like they're saying something in their own words that they might not have said. It can also be as rudimentary as just editing or changing over like voiceovers. So if we do a commercial or something, they could just change what the voiceovers are. So that's sort of what that is. That is absolutely a risk and a danger. We have not obviously seen any of that yet, but what we do with all of our content that we share out or that we create, I mean, we track it, for performance to see how it's doing and to see which audience it's reaching. but we also track it to see what people are using it for, what the sentiment around it is, and if people are taking it and then repurposing for something else. And so we have those mechanisms in place. Because we're a military group, we've created battle drills and battle books to help all our civilian counterparts that are part of our marketing organization, where if this happens, then this triggers this event to do this, in order to mitigate that. But I do think that's a risk, especially in this future age where we're not the only people with different types of technology, and we're not the only people that can put messages out there. Other entities that might have ill will toward us have technology and that is hard to differentiate. It's extremely hard to tell who made it and if it's real. Now we know what we made, and so that's how we monitor it. But we're constantly on the lookout for that. But I can foresee that being something that somebody could use against us for propaganda or otherwise, for sure.
I'm glad you're thinking through how to sort of do your battle drills because it's not if it happens, it's when it happens, right? And you guys are thinking through like how best to counter it. So I'm glad someone is. That's great. Brian,
yeah, absolutely, sir. And I apologize. Yeah, and so it's funny because we do have quite a large civilian population with us, and then we have a lot of people who come from different types of branches that are now in this organization. And I bring it up because I helped make some of our battle drills, and I used a lot of the things that I learned in my SOF and in my intel background on how to create battle drills and to think of things that people might not think of. They think, oh, well, they like our commercial. And I think, how will the bad guys use it against us, and they don't think that. They think, what channel should it be on? And I say, that's the least of my worries, to be quite honest. So I've used what I've learned from organizations like SOF and everything that I've been in to try to mitigate this kind of stuff. So.
Well, that's great, and I hope your the thoughts that you're putting forward and your team are gonna promulgate across all of SOCOM, because nothing would stop a positively trending SOF operation in the gray zone, a SOF campaign in the gray zone, than the right deepfake that completely undermines what both the U.S. at a macro level and at a more micro level, what maybe that SOF team in a particular country are doing. And so your team's ability to quickly counter that and put the right narrative out there is going to be absolutely critical in today's environment. So really appreciate you highlighting that, Kate. Thank you. Brian, a question for you. Coming from the think tank world and with your experience in the Army and in the intelligence community, what are some best practices as special operations wants to increasingly leverage the extraordinary talent and brain power in the think tank community? Granted, you're only in one, but I know you've probably talked a fair amount across the spectrum of quality think tanks out there. What are some best practices or things that you think the special operations community could and should be doing to prepare for the next gray zone operation, wherever that may be, in terms of leveraging and partnering with the think tank community?
One of the things I would say, and this is true not just for SOF, but for conventional as well, is the value of broadening assignments and those immersive experiences when you get yourself very deliberately outside your comfort zone, when you are in the minority in any way possible inside another organization, right? And sort of a classic example of this for Army officers is when you get to go to civilian grad school, right? And you're thrown in with a whole bunch of people who don't think like you, don't have haircuts like you, don't have any of the same shared experiences. And that really forces you to reevaluate your thinking. And so those kinds of experiences are ones that I think are going to be instrumental to ensuring people are the flexible, adaptive, creative people we need to operate in this kind of ambiguity and uncertainty. Because we're in an environment where as much as we try to do battle drills and create battle books for the things we're going to encounter, we can't anticipate all of them. And we have to have people who are able to make it up on the fly in a way that they understand commander's intent, that they can exercise disciplined initiative to meet that intent. And that's true whether we're talking conventional or SOF. And so one of the ways to do that, of course, is creating the fellowships that you do. Take the equivalent of a war college fellowship for a year when somebody goes off to a think tank, and do that for a sergeant first class or a captain or major, and send them somewhere for 6 months and send them on a TDY to work on a research project at a think tank, right? That kind of experience is outside their comfort zone, and they will then bring that experience back to SOF. I think that's the kind of thing that could be really transformative if you can afford the time away from the op tempo to give people up for that kind of experience. I think that could be transformative.
And Brian, excellent points. I especially like what you said about often our professional military education opportunities that you described in terms of graduate school or embedding in a think tank are reserved for officers, but we need to absolutely open it up to non-commissioned officers, warrant officers. And I'd argue we probably can do a better job too on the civilian side. That civilian cadre that are there, especially many intel analysts, many of our psychological operations professionals, like that's something that can be done. And I'm going to ensure that Charlie sends your personal email out to all of the S2s, intelligence officers across SOCOM, to ensure that they have a plug-in to ISW moving forward. We're coming up on under 10 minutes left on the panel. What I wanted to do is give each panelist a couple of minutes to kind of close out their thoughts and give us any other key takeaways for the panel as we go. And Brian, I got you up on screen. Why don't we start with you?
Sure. I would just say, holding up the Ukraine example as one to think about some new best practices we couldn't have anticipated for how information is operating in the hybrid war environment. Presidents Biden and Zelensky have become both tactical and strategic assets simultaneously, right? When you had President Biden rapidly declassifying and disseminating intelligence to pre-butt instead of rebut Russian operations in the information space. And we kept blowing up all their false flags by declassifying information, sharing it with partners and allies, sharing it with the public, right? That's a new way of information war that was a case study that we're going to need to make sure we're able to replicate in the future, recognizing that our adversaries are going to learn from this experience, and we can't do it exactly the same way next time. It's not going to work the same twice. But then also Zelensky, right? When you think about the way in which the Ukrainians were incredibly lucky that they had such a media savvy president in power when this happened. And you look at his use of both social and traditional media to rapidly convey messages to both domestic and Western target audiences. I mean, he is defeating Russian information operations and really defeating the entire hybrid warfare campaign through effective information. And one of the things that I'll be, upfront about, of course, is that the publications that ISW puts out, right, the maps that we have, are trying to inform the public about the war, but in the information domain, they are also actually supporting Ukrainian information operations, right? We're an independent research organization, and fiercely so, right? We don't take any government's money. We pride our independence. But if what we're putting out into the discourse undermines Kremlin information objectives by depicting their operational failures in Ukraine, well, we're more than okay with that. Right. And that's where all kinds of different actors can have an influence in this information space. And we need to think about how to leverage partners in new ways in light of the fact that the ability to influence things has disseminated far beyond government.
Great points, Brian, on the absolute skyrocketing importance of information in the gray zone and the way in which Ukraine, the West, the US especially, preempted some of the activities that were taking place, or the Russian hoped for activities inside of the gray zone before combat operations even began. So thank you for that. Kate, over to you for closing.
Yeah, thank you. For me, I think that the key difference in the SOF community than in other communities is the ability not just to be a leader and understand the battlefield, but to be a good teammate and to understand what you can do to help each other out. And I think that goes a long way when it comes to the gray operations as well. When we do training events with other partners, we're a teammate with them. We build that trust with them. And not only do we give them the expectations to say, hey, this is what we want you to achieve, but we give them the means and the motivation and sort of the training so that they can achieve those lofty goals. And so that's something that I've always came from from SOF community. That's something that's always been very important to me. Now, from my current job here in marketing, my job is to help create that team, help to build that force in the future, both in the soft world, in the conventional force, and to give that message and to give an accurate message both inside of the current force and then for our new applicants, and to also not be a distraction, like we mentioned with using our messaging against us. Our job is to be accurate and also to help tell the story when everything is said and done, or is moving on to a different portion of the operations. And so our role is just to help in that sense.
Great points, Kate. Thank you. And Doug, over to you for a brief 3-minute roundup of any last thoughts you may have.
So the 5th integrated program of study is soft support to resilience and resistance, which is probably the most soft of all of them, but it took me, and actually I had it right in front of me, which is unfortunate. I think that we have an opportunity to incorporate information into more exercises. I think that people are interested in, hey, as a special forces person, as a person who is in SOCOM, I need to learn this information stuff. And I think that in the hybrid space, in the gray space, we're going to be in more embassies, we're going to be out in more academic environments. And I think that our presence is sending a message also. Us being present as SOCOM sends a message, and being open to having conversations. I think that additionally, building partner capacity, again, just it's an area of expertise of mine and within the university. I think we're going to continue to be out there helping partners. Look at the budget. If you haven't yet, look at the budget and where we're giving our money for foreign support and military support. Additionally, if you look at the strategic guidance documents, it talks about by, with, and through, and also there's influence all over it. So we at JSOU, we're here. It's kind of my bag. So I appreciate being on here and having so many great questions about this topic.
Doug, thank you very much. One question came in, and rather than, I think it's something that needs to be unpacked some more. And really the question talks about defining the role, the soft role in information operations, in psychological operations, and to what depth would a special operations operator, a SOF operator, participate? And I think it's going to be one of those, it depends. My sense is if the only people on the ground in a country are, let's say, for example, a SEAL team or an ODA, and they didn't have any organic NISO, IO, PSYOPs personnel, whatever with them, then they would be called upon to do certain things to maybe outside of their traditional lanes to enable effect in those areas. Certainly I could see that happening. And so I think as the JSOU's new education kind of gets going, that Doug talked about so eloquently, I think that's one of the things that would be discussed. And certainly it'll be unpacked at Fort Bragg in terms of, and other places out in Coronado, et cetera, the role of the SOF operator in that specific thing, because it's not unique to just information operations space or the information environment. It also could be further pulled into places like electronic warfare, where what is their role, or cyber. So there's a lot of still, I think, TBDs in terms of the evolving landscape that's out there as we continue to look at how best to employ special operations inside of the gray zone. So I really thank the panelists. I thank the questions and the audience for putting up some good questions. And Charlie, I'm giving it back to you with about a minute to spare. So over to you, Charlie Fink.
Colonel Hough, many thanks to you and your panelists for a fascinating look at SOF's role in gray zone operations. Thank you for that.